Hi, this is Dovid Orlofsky, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. And whether you're watching with our friends over at Tony Time, or wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts, or call up, as I mentioned, when I was in Lakewood, a lot of people told me they call up. Tony Time has an option. They listen on the telephone. Wherever you are, we're happy to have you along. And the sponsorship this week is personal and painful and hopeful. And put it all together. I'll read you the sponsorship, and then I want to add a few words of my own. This episode is sponsored in memory of Marty Levine, Zeichel Bracha, by his NCSY friends from the Memphis Southern Region or HaNegev and National NCSY 1977 to 1981. Now, you probably know that I started in NCSY in Los Angeles. I had a chapter in Etz Jacob, 1978 to 1979. And then 1979, I became the regional director of Long Island, a position I held for 9 years. And since I was young and vibrant at one point in my life, I was flown around to a bunch of regions, and I got a chance to meet people. And one of the places they used to bring me, Rabbi Dovid Goldwasser, who everyone knows today, he was always a Talmid Chacham. Now he's, of course, very chashuv. He was regional director of Southern Region. He used to bring me down, and it was a very special place and very special people. And one of the people there was Marty Levine. I continue reading from the dedication. It's hard to put in a few words the impact he has had on so many of us during our time together in NCSY, and also during the 40 years following the heart attack brain injury he suffered on his way to the Beis Medrash. I will never forget this. He was so young, and he was a brand. He was a firebrand, and he got a heart attack, and he had brain damage. I'll never forget it. I met him maybe a year later. They didn't even know if he was going to make it. And he looks at me and says, "I remember you." We had been close. I mean, it was such a stunning experience. You know, somebody said to me once, I deal with people with mental illness, and I can go back and look at their, online background. You could see at one point they were normal people before this happened. And I mean, I knew Marty very well. And then after this happened, I mean, it was so amazing to see somebody go through that kind of a transformation. Locked in like that is the only term I can use. He was the Rosh of our gang in Southern Region, and as we fought to grow in Torah and mitzvahs, making them his goal, while serving Hashem to strengthen his soul, he inspired us to also let Torah reign supreme as we journeyed through our teenage years. We're so proud that we're in the light of Southern Region. Anyway. It was a very special time. And obviously for a lot of people, still, I mean, this is 40 years later. It's usually the adults in our lives, be they teachers, Rabbi, or advisors, who have the major influence on who we become. However, for our NCSY Chevra, while our advisors were a source of inspiration, Marty played a huge role in inspiring us to become who we are today. He especially loved you, Rabbi Orlofsky, a.k.a. the Fuller Buller Rebbe. That's what I used to do in NCSY during Ruach. And I loved him too. May he be a Meli Tiyosha for all of us. They asked not to read the names, but the names go from Atlanta, Savannah, Virginia, Texas, Long Island, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Really quite a cross-section of people who in their own right are very, very inspiring and special people. And the fact that they would choose to remember Marty by sponsoring this podcast. I think it would have meant a lot to him, because this is the kind of thing he would have really enjoyed. So, yeah. Some people have a real smooth path through life, and other people have a very difficult path. And Marty had a real hard one. There's a very powerful song, Deaf Man in the Stiebel, about this chazan whose father was deaf, and he used to come every Shabbos and give him a big yasher koach, but he couldn't hear him daven, And after he passes away, he gets up on Yom Kippur and davens the most beautiful davening he ever heard. And they say, what was special? He says, this is the first time my father heard me daven. So I guess this is the first podcast that Marty's listening to up in Shemaim, and we're happy to have you, and they're lucky to have you. And there's a hole in our life where you were. Okay, on the topic of Emunah and Tefila, which we've been dealing with in the past weeks, I mentioned in the last two podcasts that there was an interest in putting together an online chabura to learn Tefila a little more in depth. I've received a lot of response. We're trying to find a time that will work for everybody. I've gotten emails from England, from Los Angeles, from all kinds of different time zones, and we're trying to see if we can come up with a time that will be equally inconvenient for the majority of people, which is what we really shoot for. And if we can put it together, it would be great. If you're still interested in possibly participating and you want to find out more and add your voice to the decision-making process, please go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com/contact, and send a little message that you'd be interested in participating. Like I say, we have a lot of interest. We'll see if we can make it happen, because I would really enjoy that. There have been suggestions of just making a regular recording and putting it up, but the fact of the matter is that I don't think that's called a shir. A shir is interactive. There has to be, give and take, and that's why I have one shir where everybody really makes an effort to turn on their cameras, and other shirim where they don't. And when everyone turns on their camera, it really makes a big difference, because you feel like you're part of something. There are people there. If I just sit here looking at a bunch of black boxes, I feel like I'm in a protest. So in any event, we hope that we're going to be able to get this going, because when we started this podcast over 3 years ago, we mentioned that we are looking to develop an online community. And the fact of the matter is, I've spoken to audiences of 2,000-3,000 people, but every week I speak to an audience of 10,000 people, and there's I believe a certain connection. People who listen to this are motivated by a number of different factors, which maybe we'll talk about one time. But we would like to continue this with ongoing shiurim and other services. I've mentioned already, I have a trip coming to America. We're trying to put together a Rabbi Orlofsky live show. I don't know if it's going to happen yet, but we'll definitely keep you posted if it does. If you're on our email list, then you'll get an email about it. If you have not signed up, I urge you to. So that's the business portion. It's a challenge when you give a podcast like this. What do I mean by that? I, from time to time, get an email from someone who said, I just found your podcast, and I just started listening straight through. And gosh, we're almost up to 200 episodes. So that's a serious investment of time. So I try to keep the topics that we discuss generic enough that whenever you come in. Well, obviously, if you're going to do the Pesach series, it's going to be a little bit different. If you're going to do the Teshuvah one, it's going to be a little different. Yeah. So that doesn't mean we can avoid talking about things. We have to go in and approach it. And that's really one of the things that inspired the Tefila series. If you go back to the first one, is we were talking about the koyach tefila among the avos and how that develops. And that was our impetus to start discussing tefillah. So I want to discuss something, again, whenever you happen to be listening, but this podcast is going to be coming out the week of Parshas Truma. And Truma Tetzava, half of Kisisa, V'yakel Pekudei, and I would say a large portion of Sefer V'yikra, is dedicated to the building of the Mishkan and what goes into it, and the avoda that takes place there. So I thought it would be an interesting idea to start to talk about some of these inyanim. And like I say, they're universal because it's something that is the completion of us as Klal Yisrael. It's a bias. The bias is a place where we live with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's a very powerful thing. We've spoken about this in the past, but maybe we'll reiterate some of these aspects. But I wanted to take an idea from the Parsha. It's my own idea. There was a time when I was young, I used to have people over my house for Sudas. We still have people over the house for Sudas, but when I was younger, I would ask everybody to say Dvar Torah. I don't do that anymore now. In fact, life has grown much easier because once I have my children and grandchildren coming, usually that fills up the house. We don't even have room. When we have seminary girls, it's really easy because they all just talk among themselves, and I can just, learn a little bit and eat, go to sleep. They don't even notice. They're having a great time. Yeshiva guys, some of them are quiet. Some of them like to hack. What about this? What about that? Look at this. Yeah. Okay. Yesh v'yesh. Yeah. But when I was younger, I used to make everybody say Dvar Torah. Boys, girls, children of all ages. I don't have the strength anymore. But people knew this, so they would prepare when they came. One guy said a beautiful thing. If you can remember all the way back to when the Gedolim tried to make some kind of seder out of the disaster that are weddings today, where everything just becomes just over the top, crazy. So they tried making guidelines. They did not succeed, but there was at least an attempt. So it used to be that there would be a l'chaim, and then there would be a vort. And a vort in America is basically the same thing as a wedding here in Israel, only fancier and more expensive. And then they would first have the chasana. The expenses were tremendous, so they made a number of takonas. So I remember at this time there was a guy there who was a very smart fellow, and I said to him, "No, say a vort," and he said, "The Gedolim said no more vort, only a l'chaim. So I'll make a l'chaim. Chaim Tom l'shalom." That was good. That was a good one. But okay, there's different ways that people would do this. Anyway, a guy comes in and he pulls out a piece of paper and he starts to read. I'm telling you, it was incoherent, but totally incoherent. I said, I understand what you're saying. He read it again. Now, one of the problems was he didn't appreciate that most of what he was reading was Rashi Tevos and Ma'ir Makomos. I had somebody who today is a very chashuv Tam Chacham, but at the time when he was in my shir, he, like many people who are in my shir, used to try to catch me. People like to take me down. Could it be that I have a certain slightly grating attitude? Obnoxious, perhaps? I don't know. But people sometimes like to try to take me down. Anyway, so he says something, and I say, no, that doesn't make any sense. And he says, that's what it says in the Haggadah. And I said, the Haggadah? He says, yeah. And he flips to the back of the rush, and he points to a little little box there in the middle. He says, see the Hagaha. I said, you mean the Hagos HaShri? Anyway, that story must be 30 years old. And I still, whenever I see him, he goes, the Hagaha. I guess I sort of traumatized him. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. He's a very choshev Talmid Chacham. In fact, full disclosure, he said over a vort once that I just knocked off, and he wouldn't give it up. He kept working on it, and eventually he came to me Shavuos night, and he said it. He put it all together, Machlekes Rashi and Tosfos, and what a carmelist was. And I said, wait a second, this is making sense. And I brought over my good friend Rabbi Zev Redman, who's bona fide Talmid Chacham. He's one of my Talmid Chacham friends I check things out with. And he says it over, and he goes, it was the middle of the night. He goes, I must really be tired. This is making sense. Anyway, he submitted it in a contest of Divrei Torah, and he won. It was so brilliant, which just shows you that the way I am most successful at inspiring people is by convincing them that they're wrong. And that gets them crazy, and they're going to prove me wrong. And this fellow certainly did. So, but this guy is reading this Torah with things like the Hagaha in it, So I finally said, where did you get this from? He says, the Emes Yaakov of Yaakov Kamenetsky. And I pull it off the shelf and I look it up. And it's this little thing. It's all filled with Ma'ir Makomos and Rashi Tevos. So I start looking them up to try to figure out what he's talking about. And halfway through I said, why did you pick this? And he gave the obvious answer. It was the shortest one. And that is often a motivation. So I've learned Chumash and Rashi, Baruch Hashem, for many years. Maybe a quick word about this, because I think it's important. I had never gotten down to Chumash and Rashi. And I had a friend, his story is maybe 30 years ago, maybe 30 years old. And he would just rattle off Rashis. I had a niece who went to Yavna in Cleveland for seminary. I can mention her, Tova Khan. She lives in Miami now. And she said, normally you go to high school, you have these young teachers who are teaching. He says, there you had people who survived the Holocaust, and they would give you a Chumash and Rashi test. If you didn't do well, they would say to us, girls, how would we have survived Auschwitz without Chumash and Rashi? Yeah. The lingua franca of the Jewish people. I remember that made such an impression on me. My good friend, Rabbi Baruch Rabinowitz, one of the leading mechanchim of our generation, besides being a tremendous Talmid Chacham and just a wonderful guy, just a wonderful all-around human being. So we were talking once when he was in Shidduchim. He got married a little older than the average. He said to me, I went out with this girl and I mentioned a Chumash and Rashi and she didn't know it. And I said, how can I marry someone who doesn't know Chumash and Rashi? I used to tell this story over in seminary, and I'd see girls right away, start learning Chumash and Rashi. Anyway, I had never gotten down Chumash and Rashi. So I said to this guy, what did you do? He says, I just sat there, Motzi Shabbos. He says, as a bacher, now I'm married, but Motzi Shabbos, nothing doing, and I would sit there and would go through every Rashi, and I would do this year after year. That's how I got it. So I couldn't do that, but what I would do is I would get one of the children's Chumashim, which is Chumash and Rashi, which I still use to this day, because I like the print. It's big print. And I would take the parsha and I would divide it up into 5 sections, and I would do one section with Rashi every day. So I did this the first year, and I really killed myself. And if I didn't know what something meant, I looked it up, and I really worked on it. And the next year, I didn't remember anything. I did it a second time. By the third year, it looked vaguely familiar. By the fourth year, I opened it up and I understood it. So now it goes much quicker. So you have to invest 3 years to see Paris, just like a tree. Yeah, you have to have 3 years, and the fourth year you get to see Paris. So, I was pretty, and you'll see a lot of my shiurim are based on Chumash and Rashi. So one year I decided I'm going to add another Risha. So I took the Das Kanim. Why? Because it was short. I've tried to do Ramban every year, and each year I get a little further, but it's long. It's a lot of work. So I figured Das Kanim would be easy. I had it narrowed down to the Das Kanim, the Sforno, or the Rashbam. Should have gone with the Rashbam. That's really short. Anyway, so I did Das Kanim, and if you've ever learned the Das Kanim through, each one you look at and you go, What? What does he say? Now, I also did the Baal Turim once. I was talking about Atbash. And the guy says, what do you mean? The Baal Turim uses it all the time. I said, no, he doesn't. I mean, I've done some Baal Turim. He said, sure he does. So I sat down, I did all the Baal Turim. And there was no Atbash. And when I finished, I said to him, there's no Atbash. He says, well, I got you to learn the Baal Turim. That's true. Anyway, so I would go through these Das Kanim, and every now and then I would actually sit down and try to figure out a pshat of what was going on. And I have a number of shiurim that are based on the Das Kanim from that year that I spent going through it. So he asked the following question. There's a hierarchy to the materials in the Mishkan, obviously. Gold, then comes silver, then comes copper, then comes wood. Right? And you can find that there's, for example, the Mishkan itself, the Krushim are covered in gold and they sit in silver sockets, whereas on the outside there's silver around the beams, the poles, and they're put into copper sockets. You know, there's a certain hierarchy that's involved. So you think the Aron HaKodesh, which is the most important of all of the kalim, would be made out of solid gold. But it's not. It's made out of wood and covered with gold on the inside and the outside. So the Das Kanim asks, why didn't you make the whole thing out of gold? So one answer is to say it represents Torah, and Torah tells you that you should always be poshet on the inside and only on the outside should you show any glory. That's one answer. He gives another answer. He says, because the Aron had to be carried. You had to lift it up and put on your shoulders. Gold is very dense. And if you would have made the whole Aron out of gold, it would have been physically impossible to lift it. It would have weighed tons. So therefore, in order for people to carry it, it was made out of wood covered in gold. So it was only a few 100 pounds for Kohanim, pick it up and carry it. That's the answer. Ask the Das Kanim, but we know from Sefer Yoshua, Aron nosei es nosav. The Kohanim walked into the Yarden, the Jordan River, with the Aron, and it stopped. Now, obviously it didn't split. Splitting doesn't help with a river because it keeps flowing, not like a sea. The Yam Suf, you can do that trick of splitting. Instead, it just stopped flowing and flowed up, which to my mind is much more frightening if you're sitting there watching the river continue to flow up higher and higher. And they waited for everybody to go across, and when they were done, they put the river back. Now they're on the wrong side. And so the Aron picked them up and flew them across the river to the other side. Evidently, the Aron flies. So who cares how heavy it is? Aron nosei es nosav. It doesn't only carry itself, it carries the people who hold on to it. A 747 is pretty heavy, but it doesn't matter because it flies. So if it flies, who cares how heavy it is? Let it pick up and fly. So make it out of solid gold as a covet to the Torah and lift it up, and it doesn't matter because the thing flies. That'd be fine. Says the Das Kanim, Lefi Shahaya. It doesn't really fly. That was a one-time miracle that took place at the Yarden, but it's not shot that the Aron flies. It's just one time a Kodesh Baruch Hu made a nace and made it fly. La havdil elef havdalas. We asked a question a few weeks ago about Steven Spielberg. If he hadn't made all of his movies, what would he have become? One person wrote and said, well, because he made all those movies, he was able to then put out a documentary on the Holocaust, and people paid attention to him because of all his movies. Okay. But he did make a movie called E.T. E.T. was the extraterrestrial, who, by the way, ate Reese's Pieces because they offered it to M&M's, and M&M's turned it down. So they offered it to Reese's Pieces, and the sales of Reese's Pieces shot out of the ceiling after they put it into the movie. I think that was a mistake for the M&M's. That's my own opinion. As one comedian observed, I don't know what you call them M&M's, they're just M's. And why do they come in different colors? They all taste exactly the same. I have to tell you, after he pointed that out, I've always thought about that. That's really true. Yeah. Anyway, he calls them chocolate Advils, which I think is interesting. Anyway, so he ate these things. And at one point they were being chased. And he used whatever his powers were, to make their bicycles fly. And there was that famous scene in E.T. where they're all, pedaling on their bicycles as they're flying. In fact, that became the inspiration for the emblem of the Amblin entertainment thing, is the kid on the bicycle going across the moon and flying. Yeah. So lahavdil, it's not that the bicycles fly. E.T. made it fly. So it's not that the Aron flies. The Kadosh Baruch Hu one time picked it up and made it fly. Now, if we stop there, we're fine. We're fine. And in fact, the Das Kainim and the Chizkuni were both Talmidim of the Bechor Shor. And that's where the Bechor Shor stops. And that's where the Chizkuni stops. But the Das Kainim goes on and asks another question. If the Aron doesn't really fly, and it was just a one-time occurrence, Lama Nanesh Uza. What's the story? As Dovid HaMelech is bringing the Aron HaKodesh back to Yerushalayim, the Aron was captured in the time of Eli, and the Plishtim took it. And because of this, the Plishtim were affected by a plague. I don't mean to be indelicate, but it involved rats entering the body through an orifice where things usually exit the body and do not enter. Now, that's a little vague, so I'll try to clarify it a bit. It's not any of the orifices involved in checking for corona. So I've narrowed it down considerably at this point. Now, rats entering the body that way, I can only imagine, is extremely unpleasant. So they were very upset. So they took the Aron, they put it on a wagon, they sent it on its way. And eventually, it made it to Beit Shemesh. And finally, when Dovid was secure, he decided to bring it up to Yerushalayim. And he's bringing it up with singing and dancing and celebration and instruments. And at some point, the oxen that were pulling the cart lost their footing. Now, it's not supposed to be in a cart. It's supposed to be carried on the shoulders. Yeah, it's carried on the katef. The avodah is done on the katef. In fact, that's how we learn that if you carry something in the Rosh Hashanah, the Rosh Hashanah only goes up 10 tvachim. So if I'm carrying it on my shoulder, why am I chayiv? We learn it out from the Aron because they carry it on their shoulders. It was part of the avodah of the Mishkan. So instead, he put in a wagon. It says Dovid HaMelech forgot a halacha that children know. Put in a wagon, and the oxen started to shake, and the wagon started to shake, and Uzzah was afraid that the Aron was going to fall, and he runs over and grabs hold of the Aron to stop it from falling, and he dies. And that ruined the entire celebration, and they left it over there in Kiryat Ye'arim until Dovid brought it up at a later time. And the Gemara in Sota says, why was Uzzah killed? And it says he should have made a kal v'chomer. Aron nosayas nosav. If the Aron can carry the Kohanim who are holding it, then certainly it can be noisa as atzmai, it can carry itself. Says the Das Kainim. But if it didn't fly and it was a one-time miracle, why should he make a kal v'chomer? You don't expect the Red Sea to split. That was a one-time occurrence. But you don't base yourself based on that one miracle. So too over here, if it doesn't fly and it was a one-time miracle, then what's the reason that Uzzah was killed, that he should have made a kal v'chomer? Says the Daskenim, Tzarchin. Doesn't answer the question. So, I don't know what the answer is, but evidently the Chizkuni wasn't bothered by this question, and the Bechor Shor's Rabbi wasn't bothered by this question. So, Vaistas, there must be an answer, and I want to suggest maybe an answer. I want to give a more liberal interpretation of Lefi Shah. When he says it flew, maybe when it flew at the Yarden, at the Jordan River, Lefi Shah, doesn't mean it was a one-time occurrence like E.T.'s bicycle. Maybe it means that when it needs to, it can carry itself. Don't ever worry. Now, let's go back to the original question. For the covet of the Torah and the covet of Hashem, we should have made the Aron out of solid gold, but we didn't. Why? Because we wanted people to carry it. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu was meichel on his covet to make the Aron out of gold-covered wood instead of actual gold, so you can feel the burden of carrying the Torah on your shoulders. Not ki'ilu. Come on, if I can't lift it, then the whole thing's a miracle. I just say, okay, let's go. Rise, Aron. Woo! Yeah, I'll hold on to the poles. Let's go. Things get a little bad. He could just, lift up my feet and just ride, It flies. No. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted you to carry the Torah on your shoulders. But don't ever make the mistake that if you don't do it, that it's finished. Because Hashem can take care of himself. I worked once for a Kiruv organization, and they were cutting corners in halacha, in areas, clearly. They felt they had no choice because we have to save Klal Yisrael. I said, I heard a chiddush. So what's that? There's a God. He runs the world and not you. It's not that he messed up and therefore I have no choice. I have to say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, okay, stay out of the way and I'll try to clean up this mess that you made. Somebody asked Moshe Shapiro once, what should a person's approach be in Kiruv Rechokim, in Jewish outreach? And he said, don't get in God's way. We're coming to the end of time, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is bringing back everyone who's roy to come back before the end. And you're given the schus to participate. But don't think that God can't do it without you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can handle it. It's not a problem. When we are given the schus to carry the Torah, we have to remember it's a schus. I started with the dedication for Marty Levine, and I have to say, during my years in NCSY, every now and then you'd hear somebody say something like, how many people did you make from? I never made anybody from. I was a teacher. I would like to think that I was a friend. I did a little inspiration. I didn't make anybody from when I have notches on my belt. Because Baruch Hu give, and everyone who's been in the field can tell you that sometimes you do everything right and you get nothing. And sometimes you do everything wrong and the person comes back because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants this person to come back. And if you let yourself be the shliach for that, it'll come through you. And if not from you, it'll come from somebody else. And you have the schus to carry it. And the HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be moich on his kavod and make it out of wood so that you could carry it. But don't ever think that it's not going to last without you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will be here. Don't have to worry. Jewish people will be here. We have the schus to participate. And all my years in Habasas HaTorah, whether I was a Rebbe or whether I was in Kiruv, whatever I did, I always took the approach that I have the schus to participate. And that's how we all have to look at it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us the opportunity to support Torah, to carry Torah, to help other people. But don't ever get so invested to the point that you think, oh, if I don't do this, it's not going to happen. Hashem runs the world. He knows what he's doing. And we have the schus to carry it and feel the weight on our shoulders. But if it ever has to, it can pick itself up and fly. Don't worry about it. That's the point I wanted to try to make as we go into the Parsha of the Mishkan, because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a chance to, so to speak, build him a house. Yeah, it's a schus. And so we are lucky to be able to participate. And when there's a shul to build, or there's a yeshiva to build, or a community to build, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is allowing us the schus. Right, we'll talk about the Nesiim next time, who didn't quite get this message. All right, now we come to the question and answer part of our program, a new feature that our intrepid producer introduced. And we keep getting lots of questions. I can't answer all of them. Obviously, we only have a short period of time. I try to get to as many as I can. So, Huge Fan asks, do you think Rav Pesach Krohn prefaces each story by saying, I'm not David Orlofsky, I actually check out my stories? Absolutely not. The only time he ever quotes me is when he says over one of my vortlach or one of my stories, and he always speaks about me with the utmost kavod. And he's, I'm going to take a moment just to say this, right? There are certain people in this world who are roy to be our heroes. He's one of them. His father passed away when he was young. He took over his father's Mila business, and people don't like to hire young Moalim. You want to hire the most experienced guy you know out there. And he had a very hard time with a parnosa, and he took upon himself to take care of his whole family, and he took on that achrayus on his own, and he is just such an inspirational person. And the reason that he always says that I checked out this story, and in fact, one of his kids told me, because every now and then if he checks out a story and it doesn't get schmeck to him, even though it looks like it's true, he doesn't feel comfortable with it, he doesn't say it over. So to him, it was pashut. I'm sure he doesn't even have to say, I check out my stories. That goes without saying. With me, it doesn't. Okay. Anonymous asks, what is the significance of making challah on Friday? I've been told there's an inyan to do it on Friday, but I'm finding it hard. I want to know if it's a real thing or not. This is the third time I'm asking this question. If you choose not to answer it, I'll take the hint and give up. In the meantime, I make challah on Tuesday, and it still tastes delicious. Probably the reason that I didn't answer right away is because I have to actually bring a makar. That requires me putting on my reading glasses and getting a Mishnah Berurah to magically appear before me. I'm reading right from the beginning of Chelek Gimel, Hilchos Shabbos Siman Reish Mem Beis. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Mitakonis Ezra, sheyiyu mechabsim begodim behei b'Shabbos v'pnei koved Shabbos. Takonis Ezra is you should wash your clothes or dry clean them, whatever it is, on Thursday so they're ready for Shabbos. Hagah, the Ramah. Noagin lalush k'dei shir challah bebayis lasos mehem lachamim liptsoa aleim b'Shabbos v'yontif. There is a mitzvah to knead a shear of challah on Friday in your home to make breads for Shabbos and Yontif. V'hu mikoved Shabbos v'Yontif ve'ein l'shanois. And this is Kovid Shabbos, and you should not change this minig. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu milvad shahalisha v'ha'afiyah michlal Kovid Shabbos. Even the kneading and the baking is Kovid Shabbos v'Yontif. Kamo shemasayim lebesof. Od yesh b'zeh tam k'dei l'kayim mitzvahs challah. The reason we do a shear of challah is lefi she'ivda as Adam Rishon she'ayachalos she'olam. Adam Rishon died. He was the challah of the world. She'niver be'erev Shabbos, and he was created on Friday. Va'ayin ba'achronim de'afilu anogin lecho paspalta shel eno Yehudi b'chol. Even the person who eats goyish bread during the week, mikol makom, be Shabbos v'yontif, nachon lizoher shelo le'echol, kilo mipas Yisrael. If they covered Shabbos v'yontif, we should only eat Jewish bread. Says the Ber Halacha. And there's a remez to this in the Torah, he says. V'yesh remez b'kosav v'hoya bayom hashishi. This is by the parsha of the Mun, on Friday. Hechinu es asher yaviu es asher ta'afu afu. Bake what you're going to bake. Mashra diyesh la'afos be'erev Shabbos lahachin l'Shabbos. You should bake on Erev Shabbos for Shabbos. Gam bizman Gemara haya mina kavua lazeh k'mo she'evi amogen Avram. And I'll just read you this last line. U'ba'avodoseinu harabim hayom hitchilu eze noshim lahashbis haminagahu. And now, in our lowly state, there are women who have put aside this minig. V'lochin min ha'oifer, and they buy it from the baker. V'lav shapir avdi. They're mekatinan b'zer kavod Shabbos. They are lessening the kavod of Shabbos. Now, obviously, if a person can't, there's only so much a person can do. Now, what if I don't need so much? What if I'm a small group? Shir challah is going to make too many challahs. So what's better? Here's the choice. I can make a shir challah and Bo Nagid make 6 challahs. I only need 3 for Shabbos. I'll freeze 3 and use them next week, and I won't bake next week. Or make less than a shir challah every single week, so I always bake bread l'chavod Shabbos. It's machlekas hakronim. Some say it's better to do it this way. Some say it's better to do it that way. Ask whoever your local rabbi is. But in answer to the question, is it a real thing or not? The answer is yes. Anonymous asks, if all Hashem expects of us to try our best and growth takes time, why are we slammed for the times we messed up and must do teshuva for it? Would a parent punish his child who's learning to walk for every time he falls down? No. No, he would not. And that's why the pasuk says, Sheva yipol tzaddik. 7 times that tzaddik falls down. You obviously had a very unfortunate chinuch. Not dissimilar to the one that many of us had, unfortunately, where we get this idea of you're going to burn, and you're going to burn in hell, and you're evil, and kind of stuff like that. Absolutely not. The fact that we mess up is built into the system. Yeah, of course. That's why there's Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is there because we understand people are going to make mistakes. So we set aside one day a year when people can say, I'm sorry for the mistakes I made. Having said that, right? This Sivan, I'm going to be married 40 years. Do you make mistakes in a marriage? Of course you do. Everybody makes mistakes. Few and far between are the people who, like Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who at his wife's kever, where they said the minig is to ask mechila, he says, I'll do it because it's the minig, but I've never done anything in my life to hurt my wife. That's why they write books about him. Understand? That's unusual. But for many of us, it's a learning curve. We have to work on it. Great marriages don't happen. They're made. But should you say you're sorry when you do something wrong? Or should you just say, well, it was a learning experience. You understand, I was just practicing on you to become a better person. Of course not. In any situation, you make mistakes. We understand you make mistakes. But that doesn't mean you don't say you're sorry if those mistakes have consequences. So I made mistakes and I messed up. So I say to Hashem, I'm sorry. But that's not because I am afraid I'm going to get punished. As the Rambam says, Yiras Onesh is something that's only appropriate for the unlearned and little children that you have to try to scare them into doing the right thing. You're an intelligent person. You understand in any relationship, a person makes mistakes. And I want to say I'm sorry. that I made that mistake because I didn't want to do something bad that was going to hurt you. It's just the decent thing to do. So, why are we slammed for the times we messed up? I don't know who you're talking to. Who's slamming you? You got to get new friends. Don't slam someone who makes a mistake. You encourage them. Next time you'll do better. But does that mean that there's no consequences to what I did? No, of course there's consequences. I hurt somebody's feelings. I got to say I'm sorry. That mistake, hopefully I won't make again. But you're right, it's growth, and you're right, it takes time. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu is extremely understanding. I would go so far as to say he has an infinite amount of patience. It comes with being infinite. And he waits for you, and he hopes for you. But that doesn't mean that when I did some things that were wrong. Yeah. So when you're driving, and you do something wrong, if there's a cop there, you'll get a ticket. Why? Because next time you won't do it. You'll be more careful. And that's part of the growth process. I learned how to drive in Los Angeles. When I moved back to New York, I had a California license. And someone told me, there's no reciprocity between New York and California. Now, in my stupid, youthful mind, that meant that I was invisible and invulnerable, which is not the truth. So every time I would get a ticket for speeding, I'd throw it away because California license. Yeah. So one time I got stopped by a Nassau County cop. It was 30 miles. I was going 45. I mean, it was on a big deal. It was late at night. He pulls me over. He says, you're driving with a suspended license. I said, no, it's a California license. And he said, you're right. We can't suspend your driving privileges in California, but we can suspend them here in New York, and we did. This is a misdemeanor. I could arrest you. And I suddenly realized that my stupidity had consequences. And I said, don't arrest me, I don't want to go to jail. And he said to me, listen to me. You're not a bad person, but you did something stupid, and you have to face the consequences. I'm going to let you drive home, but you bet yourself a good lawyer, and you better work this out, because this is serious. And I got a good lawyer, and evidently, you know how they say whoever has the most points wins? It's not true by your license. Also not true by Weight Watchers. I thought that whoever has the most points wins was one of my problems. But nope. I had points on my license for a very long time. I had to pay a lot of fines. I had to pay a lawyer. I got out of it. But you know what? I drove a lot better after that. So it wasn't that I was being slammed. In fact, it was one of the best musha schmoozing I ever got from anybody. It was from this Nassau County police officer. You're not a bad person, but you did something stupid, and there are consequences. And a little kid who keeps falling down, yeah, there are consequences. I had this with all my kids, especially when they like to climb up on dining room table legs and then let go and smack their head. Can't tell you how many times I went to the emergency room when a kid, his head was cut open, and they were afraid of child abuse. They were going to take my kids away, but they always gave them back. Anyway, so yeah, nobody's slamming you for that. It's built into the systems. Sheva Yipal Tzadik. You have to celebrate each victory. But of course, if along the way you do some damage, you're learning how to drive and you smash into somebody's car, and you have to pay for it. It's just the reality. Yeah. Okay, well, that's it for this episode. If you want to find out more about the show, go to RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can leave a comment. You can download different shiurim that we put up there besides this wonderful podcast. You can sponsor an episode. You can go to RabbiOrlofsky.com/contact and either leave an email, or you could write that you might be interested in the Tefila Chabura that we're putting together. There are online shiurim that you can sign up for, Mesil Shisharim and Daf Yomi. And that's it for this episode. I am David Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode, and we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.